My name is Celia Woodruff, and I'm a second-year law student at Penn State Law, working with the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For the lab's Witnesses to Her Story project, we are capturing the personal experiences of women before, during, and after periods of momentum in the United States in the fight for equal rights. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Cheryl Sullivan, who's agreed to share her story as a part of this project. Throughout Cheryl's life, she's been an amazing attorney, child advocate, and pioneer, and I'm very excited to speak with you today.
Thank you.
Cheryl, let's start at the beginning. What year were you born?
1959.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Broome County, New York. I was born in Binghamton and remained in the city of Binghamton until I was going into 8th grade.
And still starting at the beginning, who were the members of your household at that time?
I have a mother and a father living in my household, and I had two siblings, a sister who was 3 years younger than myself, and a brother who was 6 years younger than myself.
And what were your relationships like with your siblings?
I would say that I was fairly close with my sister when we were young. My parents tell me that I actually named her. I named all of my dolls Susan, and they named her Susan because they thought I would call her that anyway. And our relationship stayed, I would say, very close until I got in middle school, and then it became more of a little sister tagging along kind of relationship. And we have since moved into, again, a very close relationship. With my brother, I would say I felt very close with him, but also very protective because he was quite a bit younger. So I believe I maintained a close relationship with him pretty much throughout our lives together.
And amongst your siblings, how were responsibilities in the house divided between you all?
My mother had responsibilities and tasks for all of us. I always felt that was a little more responsibility placed on myself as the oldest child.
And speaking of your parents, did either of your parents work for a living?
They did. Both of my parents worked outside of the home for as long as I can remember.
What jobs did they have?
My mother initially started out working in roles in a factory, as did my dad. And then she moved into jobs in a hospital setting. That was where her real interest lied. She started out initially as like a ward clerk, where she would be the receptionist and hand out responsibilities on the hospital units. And she eventually went back to school. When I was in 11th grade, she returned to a BOCES program to get her LPN degree. And after I went to college, she went to community college and got her RN. So she became a nurse and was a nurse in a pediatric unit for 30 years. My dad initially did factory work when he was young and did that for a number of years and then moved into owning his own business.
Between both of your parents, how were household responsibilities divided?
My father worked outside of the home, I would say more hours than my mother. And so household responsibilities were very much hers. Outdoor things like taking out the trash and taking care of the yard and those kinds of things. My dad would do that, but inside the house, she was the boss.
Did your mom also make most of the household decisions then?
Absolutely. My mother always did all of the paying of the bills and making decisions about decorating and vacations and all those kinds of things.
You mentioned earlier you having a lot of responsibility as the older sibling. Did you have similar household responsibilities as your mom?
I think she took on the lion's share of the responsibilities, but she would ensure that we would help at dinner time, that we would take care of different cleaning tasks, take care of our rooms. Um, but again, she was taking care of most of it.
Now that we've talked a bit about your family, let's move forward to school. What year did you start school?
I started kindergarten in 1964 when I was 5.
Where did you attend school?
Initially, it was in the Binghamton City School District, and the first school I attended was Theodore Roosevelt Elementary School.
How big was the school at that time?
Binghamton City schools were fairly large, but there were a number of elementary schools in the district, so it was split up geographically. And so I was on more of the north side of Binghamton.
Did you enjoy school?
I did. I was very much a kid who didn't want to miss school.
I know that Binghamton City School District is a part of the public school district. Do you recall whether there was a dress code at that time?
There was not a dress code. There wasn't a dress code for the school, but my mother was extremely strict as far as school goes. And from the time that I started school through high school, no jeans, no sweatpants. I was skirts, dresses, and dress pants throughout my time in school.
Was it the same for your other siblings?
I believe that she kind of loosened up those restrictions with my sister and my brother in their high school years.
And at that time, do you recall wanting to be anything when you grow up? When you grew up?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah. Do you recall wanting to be anything when you grew up during those early years of school?
Absolutely. From the time I was probably 6 or 7, I talked about being an obstetrician and gynecologist. And that was initially my goal. And I would say I carried that goal up until high school.
Did you see other people in your life who were obstetricians?
I did not. I just felt strongly that I wanted to help people. I felt like a role in the medical field, probably based on seeing my mother as a nurse. Um, but I felt like that role as a doctor would be something that I would be capable of doing and be able to help by doing that role.
Do you remember whether a lot of your peers had similar goals?
They did not when I was young. I don't remember them talking about what they wanted to be or do as much as I did. By the time I got to middle school and high school, I would say my friends were getting more focused and some were talking about what they wanted to do.
And moving forward to a little older during middle school, did you gravitate towards any subjects?
I would say history, English, the language classes, Spanish, I was taking in middle school, and I had taken German when I was in elementary school. I enjoyed those very much. And probably the extra classes like music, those things, I gravitated to them as well.
You mentioned gym. Did you play any sports when you were in middle school?
I did intramural sports, but I did not play competitively. My interests were more focused on music, band and chorus, and also theater.
What did you do in band?
I played the clarinet.
And you also mentioned again the obstetrician goals. Did you have a health or a sex ed class in middle school?
I believe we had one in high school, not in middle school.
Who introduced you to the term gynecologist and obstetrician at such a young age then?
Probably seeing it on TV or reading about it.
Now, moving forward to high school, you said that you had a health or a sex ed class in high school. Do you remember the things that were discussed in that class?
I felt like it was very broad, everything from basic health issues, things about communicable disease, sex ed, um, healthy living habits. It was really like a broad class in its topics.
Did the boys and the girls take those same classes?
They did.
When you were in high school, were you able to choose the classes that you took?
Somewhat. If you were on a particular track, there were things that you had to take. We have a Regents program in New York, and so if you were taking the Regents track, you would need to have English, science, math, social studies, certain classes, but then there were extras that you could choose as well. I don't think we had as many options at that point as they do today.
Were there any classes that you and a lot of your friends decided to take?
One thing, I was not as interested in home economics. I was more interested in doing the technology class where you could make things. And so my friends and I tended to gravitate toward that rather than the female focused kind of class.
When you say female focused, did there tend to be more boys or more girls in certain classes for home ec and the technology classes?
Definitely more girls in home economics and more boys in the technology classes in middle school and high school.
Did you participate in any other extracurriculars in high school?
I did. Again, I was in the marching band, the jazz band. I did drama club and was in a number of plays. We had a debate program at one point, and I participated in that. That's where my interest really was at that point.
Did you work outside of school?
I actually did not have a job with my extracurriculars. I had very little time. And so I did not have a job until the summer after I graduated from high school.
We will talk about after high school. Before we do, did any of your friends or peers have jobs outside of high school?
Yes, a number of my friends were working.
Do you remember what kinds of jobs they had?
We had a number of different places locally, both industry, manufacturing places where they could work, and also like restaurants and dairy bars and convenience type stores, grocery stores. Those types of jobs were the ones that they largely had.
Did your friends enjoy their jobs?
Some of them did.
Did the boys and the girls tend to have the same jobs?
I think they would have some of the same jobs. For instance, like in a grocery store, you would see males and females. In other settings, you would see more males than females. Some would have jobs working on farms that would largely be males. Some would have babysitting jobs, which thinking back on it, I did do some babysitting, but it wasn't like a regular type of job for me. So I guess that's why I didn't see it as a job per se.
And was anything else going on in your life at the time you were in high school?
Um, I would say one of the bigger things was within my larger family, seeing households where they weren't as stable as my own. I lived in the community, and so did all of our extended family, really. And so we spent a lot of time doing things with both sides of the family, extended family, and seeing those strained relationships in those other families was upsetting to me. I would say going back to elementary school, one of the more traumatic situations was in 5th grade. My teacher at that time was a male teacher, and he was drafted to Vietnam. And so halfway through the year, he left to go into the Army. And that was pretty traumatic for all of us as kids.
In middle school, did you talk about that with your friends, the Vietnam War and your teacher?
We did talk about that, yes. I actually, at one point, wrote a poem about it, and it ended up being published in the school newspaper. And I remember that being a source of like pride for my parents, but also kind of a strain because other kids weren't as accepting of people doing something like that at that point in time, and questioned whether I'd actually written it myself, which was extremely hurtful to me. And I think those things always make you question whether you should continue to put yourself out there in that way.
Why didn't they think you wrote it yourself?
I think they just couldn't imagine themselves having done that. And so, that aspect of, if I wouldn't have done this, why would someone else in my own group or age range do that, take that step, have those thoughts? I don't know.
When you were a little older in high school, did your family or anyone outside of school talk about the Vietnam War with you?
I think that we talked about it more in school, more with friends. I don't remember having a great deal of conversation with my parents about it. I think I knew how they felt about things, but it wasn't something that we sat down and had those kind of conversations. I think I was much more of an introspective person, and thought a lot about what was happening in the world. I think they were more busy trying to take care of their family, and it's not that they were oblivious to issues, but I think I just focused more on those things than they might have.
That poem you wrote, what was it about?
It was about men going off to war, and how it felt seeing someone go and how they would feel.
Now, moving forward back to high school, what year did you graduate?
1977.
I know that a couple years before that, there was the Civil Rights Act was passed, the Voting Rights Act was passed in the 64 and 65. Do you remember anyone talking about that?
I do remember watching different people talking about what was happening with those issues. I do remember talking about them in class. I remember grown-ups around me having conversations about the issues.
Do you remember what the feel of those conversations were, whether it was well received?
I felt like it was a mix. I always felt like there were folks who were afraid of what that change would bring. And for those folks, they seemed to be more wanting things to stay as they were, simpler times and gender roles and people knowing what they quote unquote should and shouldn't be doing. I do remember discussions about women having aspirations for different career roles and whether or not that would change the family structure, whether or not they would eventually have families of their own. Could they do that? I felt like there was more of a sense that if a woman took a path towards a career, it would shut down the path toward being a parent, and being an active mother.
Speaking of goals, we talked about your professional goals when you were in elementary school. Did your personal and professional goals change by the time you graduated high school?
Yes, so I feel like while I was in middle school, I was still working toward those goals. I was a medical explorer at a hospital. I was a candy striper at a hospital. I was doing all these things that were focused on medical professions. And then when I got to high school and took that level science classes, I started to question whether or not that would be something that I would be comfortable in and successful in moving forward. And so I started to question whether that was the career path for me. And I would say probably between 10th and 11th grade, I was looking more toward the possibility of law school.
When you were a candy striper before that, do you remember whether the doctors tended to be men or women?
Largely men at that point. Um, it was very much men were the doctors, women were the nurses, and the candy stripers were largely female.
Now, moving forward, you said you graduated high school. What did you do after high school?
So immediately after high school, I worked for the summer, as I said, and then I went to undergraduate school. I went to SUNY Cortland, where I majored in political science.
Before we talk about Cortland and your undergraduate education, what were your responsibilities at your summer job?
I worked at a local dairy bar, which they had like a convenience store, but they also sold food items, including ice cream and those kinds of things. So I was largely preparing food and doing checkout for folks at that. And I did have a number of other friends who worked there as well.
And moving forward to Cortland, why did you decide to go to Cortland?
It's funny, my husband and I both talk about our guidance in high school, which we felt, back at that point was fairly non-existent in terms of um, young people and their goals and where they should go to school. Uh, my recollection is having the guidance counselor hand me a booklet and said, pick 4 SUNYs that you want to apply to, and it's X amount of money. And at that point, I think my focus was leaving home, but also not being too far away. And so that kind of structured more where I chose to apply, rather than where was the best place for the field of study that I was looking at. And I didn't feel like I had that guidance to say, these are the schools you should be looking at.
Was that the same for boys and girls?
Honestly, I don't feel like we talked about that. I think they probably pushed for males a little bit more. If they were looking at professional careers, they would have more conversation with them than with women.
You mentioned your husband and discussing high school. Did you meet your husband in high school or was that later on?
No, I did not meet my husband until later.
Now, when you went to Cortland, you said that you were majoring in political science. Did that change throughout your time at Cortland?
So I continued to have the major in political science. I added a communications minor. And I also, in my junior year, was in a fairly serious relationship and questioning, did I want to go immediately to law school? and ended up getting certified in my last year to teach secondary social studies. And in making that decision, it changed my major technically, but I was still taking all the political science classes, but spent one semester just getting certified to teach social studies.
Why were you questioning law school?
Again, I was in a fairly serious relationship, thinking about would I want to go to school immediately after that? Would I be moving to another area? Just sort of questioning whether or not it was the right time to make that decision about law school.
Were a lot of your friends in serious relationships as well?
I would say probably less than half were in serious relationships.
And outside of that, did you participate in any extracurriculars at college?
I worked while I was in college through the work-study program in the political science office, which I did from my first year there through my last year. So I spent a lot of time in the office, and I also participated in programming through that office quite a bit because I had developed relationships with the professors there as well. I was a resident advisor in the dorm in my junior year. So I stayed involved in campus activities that way. Was always involved with dorm council and those kinds of things.
What kinds of rules did they have in the dorms?
My first year, I lived on a floor that was separated. One wing was for males, one wing was for females. And so there wasn't supposed to be any males on our wing after midnight. And that changed the next year. I was on a co-ed floor that didn't have that separation.
And you also mentioned being involved in the political science department. Did you have any mentors specifically in that department?
I did. My advisor from the first year was the department chair, Bill Rogers, and he was a mentor for me throughout the period of time that I was there. He was a great advocate for me taking chances and trying different things and trying to expand my horizons in terms of what I might think about as possibilities for the future.
Did you ever talk with him about law school?
I did. He was the pre-law advisor, so he knew that was an interest of mine and tried to guide me into different opportunities that were available for folks that were looking at law school.
Were a lot of your peers looking at law school?
At that point, there were a number of folks in the political science department that were looking at law school. It wasn't a huge department. The campus was more focused on athletics, recreation, and education. So we were kind of smaller and not as like largely seen as a group that the campus was focusing on necessarily. I think that has changed. The department has grown, and there are many more folks now that are looking at law school than there were back then. In my peer group, I didn't have anyone that was a roommate or a close friend that was looking at law school or those kinds of professions.
What do you mean by those kinds of professions?
More graduate school required careers, professional careers with advanced academic requirements. Many of them were in like recreation department, physical education, where they would be almost immediately moving into their career rather than going on for more school.
What career was that? Careers as teachers?
Teachers, parks directors, and working in the park system. They had a big recreation program, and so they would run community centers and those kinds of things. I had a number of friends who were physical education majors, so they were looking at teaching, but they were also looking at coaching and everything related to sports within the community.
And going back to that political science department, do you recall whether there are many female professors?
I believe while I was there, there was one female professor. Most of the others were male.
Did you ever talk with that professor?
Somewhat, yeah.
Now, I guess at this time when you're in college, do you recall having any role models at that time?
Um, I would say personally, my greatest role model was my mom. She was someone that was raising a family, looking to improve herself and move into a career that she had always wanted. And so she was taking care of us, taking care of the house, and going back to school at the same time. And over the years, I've just continued to be amazed by what she was able to do in that period of time. I think that in the world at large, I tended to watch women who were doing more non-traditional roles and finding those women as role models. I was interested in looking back historically at different women who had done things outside of the norm and were finding success in those careers. Yeah.
And in college, what year did you graduate college?
1981.
What did you do after graduating?
After graduating, I took a year off. As I said, I was questioning whether or not I was going to go to law school, um, partly because of the relationship and partly because of just wondering, did I want to continue with my education or move into the work world? Over that first summer, the relationship that I was in ended, and I ended up taking on a job that became my job for the next year. And then I immediately started applying to law school because I decided it's time to move into what I had initially thought that I wanted to do. And over that summer, I worked in a medical library.
What were your responsibilities at that library?
I had all kinds of responsibilities. There were doctors who would be looking for different articles about types of cases or diseases they were studying. I would do the research on those, be taking care of all of the library itself in terms of making sure that all of the journals and the books were where they needed to be. Would help folks find those journals and books. Sometimes it would be conducting some research and providing the information to the medical staff. Just a variety of different things.
When you got that position, what was the interview process like?
I submitted an application and then interviewed with the librarian of the hospital medical facility.
What types of questions, if you remember, did they ask you?
I think about my education, about a lot of different things about work experience, what my goals were, different specific questions about tasks that they would do and comfort level with those things.
Once you were hired, what did your coworkers look like?
Largely female.
Did you have any male coworkers?
The only males were generally the doctors and orderlies in the facility.
How did that make you feel?
Like I wanted to go to law school.
And then how long were you working at that job for?
basically 1 year between undergraduate and then in um, August of 82, I entered law school at Syracuse University.
When you left that job, did you look back and think that you enjoyed that job at the medical library?
I felt like there was a reason for me to be there. First of all, learning the library system was extremely helpful because I ended up getting a job in the law library while I was in law school. So that worked out well. The other thing was a very personal thing. My grandmother, who I was extremely close to, was very ill, and she ended up in the hospital that I was working at, and I was able to spend every lunch during the week with her. Um, and so I came to look back on that as kind of, I was meant to be there at that time to have that time with her. So I I felt like being there was the right thing for that period of time.
What kinds of things did you talk about with your grandmother?
We would sit, and she was an incredible fan of the soap opera Days of Our Lives, and we would sit and watch that together. We would talk about my siblings, my parents, her history, things that she wished she had done, things that she enjoyed doing. And she just was one of my biggest fans and would always encourage me and tell me that I could do anything that I set my mind to. And during that period of time, she continued to reinforce her belief in me.
You mentioned watching Days of Your Lives together. Was that a popular show at the time?
Uh, it was, and it was some somewhat more popular in our family, I think, because my grandmother watched it. My mother started watching it. She still watches it today. So it's been kind of a running joke in our family that everyone has to have seen that at some point. You know, the grandchildren and great grandchildren have all seen that, something of that show.
Who were your grandmother's favorite characters on the show?
I would say she gravitated toward the Horton family, which was the key family in the show. They were the ones that everyone looked to provide comfort and guidance, and were the core characters. She enjoyed them.
When looking at the male and female characters on those shows, what kinds of roles did everyone have?
I felt like initially women were more wives, mothers. They might work in a restaurant or something like that. There weren't as many professionals. Over the years, it changed so that there were more professional female characters in roles such as doctors, lawyers, through to today where women have every kind of job that there is. So there definitely was a change over the years.
Now, the doctors you were working for at the hospital, were they respectful of you and your coworkers?
I would say for the most part they were.
Mhm. And after the medical library, you mentioned going to law school. What year was that?
1982.
Were you excited for law school?
Excited, nervous, I think all the range of emotions, but I was ready.
Did anyone in your family go to law school?
I was the first person in my family to go to college.
What kind of law were you interested in studying, if anything, when you went?
I actually envisioned myself as a criminal defense attorney. I thought that's where I would end up.
And you went to Syracuse College of Law, correct?
Correct.
When you went to Syracuse, what was the composition of men and women in your class?
I went on an incredible year where they were looking to enhance the diversity, not only male, female, and racially, but also age-wise. And so our median age was I believe 37, if I'm not mistaken. And so there were many people that were coming into this as a second career. And so in my group of friends in law school, I ended up being one of the youngest people in the group. Many of them had already had prior careers and were coming back to law school as a second chance.
What kind of careers did they have before law school?
Nursing, museum curator, social worker, just nursing again, and different medical situations, administration, a wide variety. There were some folks that were in politics and looking to just enhance their job credentials. Um, there was a unique mix of folks in that class.
Why do you think the College of Law was trying to bring in a more diverse class?
I think they were looking to bring a different group of folks into the field of law, and to see how that would have an impact not only in their community but in the school going forward, whether that would attract more of that diverse group going forward, or whether it would just be kind of that experimental situation.
Was it well received throughout the law school?
I would say there were some folks that received it very well and some not as much.
Could you provide an example of that?
There were situations where I felt like some of the professors thought of it more as that we're just going to try this and see if these folks will actually enter into the practice of law. And so in classes, sometimes professors would gravitate toward spending more time focusing with the students they thought that would actually practice versus those that they thought may not actually be successful and move forward in the profession.
Did you talk about that amongst your friends?
Yes.
What were people's opinions on that?
I think that there were a number of people who weren't necessarily there because they had a huge desire to be in the courtroom. They looked at law school as the ability to have this background that would be helpful regardless of what they decided to do. And I believe that I had a number of folks in that class who were friends and peers who were not looking to be litigators. And throughout their lifetimes, even if they tried courtroom work, it wasn't for them. And many of my friends moved into more clerking roles, research-related work, administrative roles, not really courtroom work per se. And I feel like that's somewhat different today. In the young people that are going to law school, they are not looking at that to enhance their skills outside of entering into the practice of law.
When professors gave more attention to some students, anticipating that they'd go into the practice of law, how did that make you feel?
It made me angry, but it also motivated me to continue to do the work and to just prove that I was someone that was motivated to enter into the field and to do the work. And it didn't matter to me whether other folks thought that, for instance, young women or women in general were going to continue to practice. I knew what I wanted to do and I knew what I was capable of doing, and I didn't let that hold me back. I feel like we just as a group supported each other in just moving forward regardless of how people interacted with us.
Outside of classes, did you participate in any extracurriculars?
The first year, I felt like all we did was study, and that's all they wanted us to do. I lived basically in a small apartment and spent most of my time either by myself or with my study group. That was my social life, was our law school study group. Um, in my second and third years of law school, I became a resident advisor in an undergraduate dorm at the same time I was going to law school. So I would say to folks, I am law school by day and undergraduate kind of by night. And that was a good mix for me because I was able to take advantage of interacting with folks more, enjoying what was happening on campus more, and also still continuing to get my work done. I also worked in the law library through that time, so I was doing a combination of work and play during the second and third years.
When you were involved on campus, did you notice any activism happening on campus?
There was activism. I I felt like there was less activism at that point than there had been when I was younger around the Vietnam War, maybe when I was in middle school, about civil rights and equal rights. We talked about this when I was in college, and again when I was in law school, that folks were becoming a bit more apathetic and not being quite as activist as they had been.
Did you think that was good or bad, or did you have any opinion on that?
I I felt that it was bad in the sense that folks were not necessarily out there fighting for the things they should be fighting for. Um, and it was difficult to get people motivated at that point to jump into those different activist roles.
And outside of your involvement on campus, I know we discussed earlier that you were involved in mock trial. When did that come up in law school?
So mock trial was the first year, and I ended up participating in the mock trial with one of the friends from my study group. We were the ones that were the most interested in um, a future in being in the courtroom. And we had a situation early on where we competed against two male uh, members of the law school. And the judge was a local attorney. And after we were done, he indicated that he was going to direct his comments to the men as they would probably end up in the courtroom and that we would probably end up at home taking care of kids in the kitchen. And I remember at that point, my friends that had come to watch the competition being so irate. I was just stunned that it was a comment that was made, clearly inappropriate, and didn't really know how to handle that kind of situation at that point.
Was anyone else in the courtroom at that time?
There were quite a few people in the courtroom. There were a number of students that were observing. There were people from the law school that were observing. And I just remember our close friends just being so irate and hearing them, and what they were saying behind us.
The opposing counsel who he directed feedback to, did they have any reaction to those
They,
comments?
yes, they apologized to us after for the comment that was made, and indicated that, they didn't share that kind of opinion and that they felt it was inappropriate.
Did the judge give you any feedback?
Very little.
And after that competition, did you talk about that with anyone?
So one of my friends went to the professor that was in charge of setting up the mock trial program and talked about that experience. And he did come to me and asked what, if anything, that we wanted to do. We could make a formal complaint if we wanted to. I ended up not doing that at that point. I didn't necessarily feel that it would change anything. I just wasn't prepared to take it any further at that point. And today I regret that.
Why do you regret that?
I feel that if we had taken the opportunity to bring that commentary more out in the open, there would have been a chance to discuss it further, and for other women after us potentially not to have to deal with that. I don't know that anyone got a similar comment, but I'm assuming that that individual, if not others, would make a similar comment.
Did you feel that your advisor who was in charge of mock trial, that their response was appropriate?
I felt like he gave us the opportunity to do something, but I don't feel like he encouraged us to take it any further.
And when that judge at the competition made those comments, how did the judge appear when he made those comments?
Just very matter of fact, like that's exactly how he perceived things. That's how he felt things would be. No hesitation in making that comment.
Did you talk about this with your mom at all?
I think I did. Yeah, I talked about it more with my friends there because I knew that they would understand how that felt and that they would give me probably better advice. She would be more of a mom looking to protect me and giving me advice that way rather than as peers who would, have different advice for me.
Mhm. After that competition, how was your mock trial experience after that?
I pretty much shut down after that.
Oh, did you continue participating in
I
mock
did
trial at
not.
all?
I did not. I'm not sure that I put myself out there very much in the law school at all after that. I think I shut down until the summer after my second year. I did a program in London, which was for academic credit, but you would actually be working in a solicitor or barrister firm in London. It was an incredible experience. And it brought all of the educational work that we had done and the experiential opportunities that I didn't feel that we had had, and put into perspective for me that I could do the work. And it made me much more engaged when I returned to law school for the last year.
What was a highlight of your experience in London?
I think the scariest, but it was a highlight in that they trusted me to go into courtrooms to do arguments for the solicitor firm. And one was in an immigration situation where our argument was that it was unsafe for this woman to return to her home in Iran because she was working as a cosmetologist, and that would be punishable by death if she had to return home. And so they let me go in to make that argument. And I remember the hearing was held in an airport, and it was nerve-wracking, but also exhilarating to go in and make the argument, and we were successful on it. So being able to actually go into the courtroom and make those arguments was just so much reinforcement. And it was a great opportunity to be in a vibrant city like that, and to have friends that were there as well, and to be sharing in the work that they were doing We would work during the day and get together in the evening to talk about all the things that we had done, and folks that we were meeting and different opportunities in the field. And it was extraordinary.
Were the opportunities the same in London for you and your friends compared to back in Syracuse?
I felt like there were more opportunities, and I also felt like I was seeing more female attorneys. The solicitor firm that I worked in, I think, was pretty much half and half, males and females. And I remember working with both, and um, the females were very good about sitting down and giving advice both for the profession and for life in general. I remember those conversations vividly.
Could you give an example of one of those conversations?
One of the conversations that really stuck with me was they have a practice of taking holiday, which is a month or more of vacation at one time. And I remember one of the female attorneys sitting down and saying, you have to take this time. You have to take care of yourself. You have to spend time with your family. You cannot continue to do the work at the high level unless you take care of yourself and take some time away from the work. It's just as important as the work. And I hear those words in my head a lot.
What kind of work were your friends doing in London? Was it the same?
I had one friend that was working in the royal court. She had an opportunity to work with barristers and see a lot different things. There were other women that were working in solicitor firms. Um, Actually, the group that was there, I would say, was more female than male, which was kind of extraordinary as well. And most of us were doing a variety of types of law. Some were doing more commercial litigation. Some, like myself, were a variety: criminal law, municipal law, immigration law, just across the board. It was really amazing.
Now, when you returned back to Syracuse to finish up law school, did anything happen during those last year or so at Syracuse?
In in the last year at Syracuse, I continued to work as a resident advisor in the undergraduate dorm. While going to law school, I still had the job in the library, but academically, I kicked it up a notch because I felt like after that summer, I truly felt like I could do the work, and all of it gelled and made sense to me. And so I just became more focused on what it was that I was hoping to do, and feeling like I could do it at that point. And the end was in sight, which was motivational as well.
You talk about London being this great experience and giving you a lot of energy. Did you face any challenges when you were in London?
I actually never felt like anyone was questioning our ability or our desire to do the work. I honestly didn't feel challenged when I was there. I felt encouraged, supported, like I was getting good advice, good direction, good opportunity.
Now, back at Syracuse, when did you graduate law school?
1985.
What did you do after graduation?
Shortly after graduation, I started working for the district attorney's office in St. Lawrence County.
What did the application process look like for that job?
There was a paper application and then an interview process that required a couple of different in-person meetings with the person who was the district attorney at the time, and then also with one of his senior assistants.
Did those interviews go well?
I thought they went pretty well.
After you got your position at the DA's office, what did your day-to-day look like?
So when I went there, they were looking to fill satellite offices so that the newer attorneys were kind of positioned around the county. It's very large land-wise. And so covering the local courts was an extraordinary responsibility. And they were looking to bring in at that time 3 people to go to satellite offices in 3 different towns. And it just ended up that I was chosen to be in the one that was farthest from the county seat, where the DA's office actually was. And so my day-to-day was a lot of driving back and forth. There was some time spent in that local office in Messina, but more of my time ended up being on the road to the local courts and back to the Canton office, which was the county seat.
What kind of work were you doing?
I was largely covering vehicle and traffic and low-level misdemeanor offenses in all of the local courts. A little bit of trial experience, and then there was an opportunity for me to do some work with a local attorney, which the office was supportive of doing that. And his office did a wide variety of legal work. So I got to do a little bit with him as well.
Who were your colleagues at the DA's office?
There was a mix of male and female. There were definitely more males in the practice. But my colleagues as attorneys were, there were a couple of female attorneys. I would say the women that I spent time with in the office were more support staff than attorneys, because there was one other female attorney who spent a great deal of time mostly out of the office. So we didn't spend a great deal of time together.
Did the leadership at the DA's office reflect that composition?
The boss was male, my supervisor was male. The judges were almost exclusively male. So that's pretty much the way that it was then.
And when you were at the DA's office, did you enjoy your work there?
I did. I had felt initially that I would come in on the other side of the work as a public defender, but I ended up in the DA's office, and I think I enjoyed the structure of the work, and I learned a lot from the other people that I worked with as well, the police, all the different folks that were involved in the process.
What else was going on in your life at that time?
It was the first time that I had lived that far away from home. And so I was developing my own social structure, still trying to maintain some contact with, college friends and law school friends, but also focusing very much on creating a new social structure for myself and still maintaining contact with my family. I was always very close with my family, and so I would try to spend time with them as well. And things started happening with my family in terms of my sister getting pregnant and my mom having some medical things. And so after about 1.5 years, I ended up coming back to Broome County.
When you came back to Broome County, did you continue practicing law?
I did. I was working in a local firm that was general practice. So they did real estate, matrimonial, criminal, bankruptcy, workers' comp. I mean, just across the board, different kinds of work. And I felt like that period of time was essential in me figuring out not only what I liked, but what I really didn't like in terms of the field of law. I think that, go ahead.
No, continue.
I think the thing that I learned most at that point was my heart was in work that had a human connection. I wasn't a research person. I wasn't a paperwork person. I was a people person. And the role that became the most important to me at that time was working as an attorney for the child and family court. And I found those cases compelling and felt like my work was making a difference in that situation.
What prompted you to make the switch from being at the DA's office to the general practice and advocate for the child?
That was, I believe, in the move. I really was trying to figure out, do I want to stay in that role as a prosecutor, or are there other fields I would be interested in? And so general practice made sense to me, where I could learn more and figure out what it was that I wanted to do going forward. And it was during that period of time that the human connection in the legal cases, became very compelling for me.
Do you recall what your first case was as an advocate for the child and family court?
Mm. I believe my first one was in a contested custody matter. And so it was meeting with the children to kind of figure out what their position was, and also doing as much background on the parents as I could to kind of make a recommendation to the court. At that point, the role of the attorney for the child was much more making those recommendations based on your own instinct and the research and conversations, whereas today it's much more based on representing your client specifically and what they want.
Was anything else going on in your life when you were at this general practice?
Yes, I started my family during that period of time. And so I had two children within a year and a half of each other, and pretty much jumped right back into work immediately. So I was, a working mom with young kids and a pretty new career. So trying to juggle those things, that was a stressful period of time, but I continued to do the work, and just tried to do the best job that I could in both fields.
Why did you jump so quickly back into work?
I honestly felt like I didn't want to be away too long. I didn't want to put more responsibility on other people. I felt like I needed to continue to do the work and to provide for the family and to do all those things and to not lose a step career-wise.
Were you given maternity leave at that time?
I didn't take much,
Mhm.
and it wasn't really a big discussion of you need to take X amount of time. I just did what I felt was right.
Were you married at the time?
Uh, no, I was not.
Mhm. So moving forward, when you're raising your kids, were a lot of your coworkers having kids as well?
I would say no. At that point in time, not as many were. More support staff than the professionals. Um, it was within my community, much more males in the professional roles. And so they were not taking time off. Even if they had a family, their wife was taking care of the child or making decisions related to time off, and men weren't taking that paternity leave or family leave.
When in your life, did you have anyone who you're in a relationship with regarding the children?
I did have someone that I was in a relationship with at that period of time. Um, and that relationship was not one that was strong, supportive, um, or one that eventually worked out. So it ended up at a point in time when I was a single mom raising my kids and working.
Did you see many other single moms in your community?
Not as many as there are today.
Mhm. And were you said that you worked with a lot of men. Were they receptive to your role as a mom and as an attorney?
I don't feel like I talked about um, being a mom. If someone specifically asked the question, if I had children, I would answer the question. But I tried to not focus on my personal life as much. I think I was much more subdued in my personal relationships with folks that I worked with and just trying to focus on the work and have them see me as a professional and not um, discussing outside of my office, maybe.
Mhm. Outside of work and family, did you do anything else?
I started becoming more involved in like different social activities with people that I worked with, different things that they were doing, like played volleyball for a while, played on a trivia team, different things to, just meet folks and to have some fun outside of home and work. And during that period of time, I actually met my husband arguing against him in court. And we became friends for a period of about 6 years. And we did a lot of those activities in the same group of people and eventually became a couple and got married.
Were you still at the general practice when you got married?
No, I had moved to the county attorney's office. So in December of 90, I made the decision to apply for the county attorney's office, specifically to work in the family court unit. And that was a direct kind of offshoot of my work as an attorney for the child. I worked on cases with the county attorney's office, and when there was an opening, someone that worked here said, "Hey, I think that this would be a good fit. Are you interested?" And I was, and have been here working in the county attorney's office ever since.
When you switched over to the county attorney's office, what was your role like when you were first hired?
I was um, worked specifically in the family court unit, but our office has never been one where you could do one particular thing. There's so many different responsibilities in the office that everyone was doing some department work along with their other tasks, but the main responsibility was to do the prosecution of juvenile delinquency and person in need of supervision cases. And when I first started, there were a huge number of cases, and I was one of the only people that was working on those cases. So it did keep me extremely busy.
You mentioned at the time that you're also married. What did the balance at home look like?
So I got married a couple years after starting in this work, and he also is an attorney, and so he understood um, like what goes into a day-to-day situation. That connection has always been helpful because we both tend to like give each other the space that we need, or the extra help that we need after a particularly stressful day. We kind of split the roles. I am not someone who loves to cook. He loves to cook. And so we just kind of moved into that balance of sharing responsibilities in every way.
Now, looking back at your work at the county attorney's office, who were your supervisors at the time?
So when I first started, um, the the county attorney himself was basically the supervisor for everyone. And he would be pulled in so many different directions that it was, you know, triage, who needs what at any point in time. There wasn't a unit of folks that were working on family court. So he was very supportive and helpful in anything that I needed at that point in time, but also wasn't completely focused on that work. Over the time that I've worked in that field, I moved from doing the work to supervising, and there became more people working in that unit. And so as the supervisor of that unit, it would be me helping out newer folks in that work, and then the county attorney or deputy helping me and dealing with more politically charged issues or issues with the court and that kind of thing.
When you were working on issues with the court and being in the courtroom, did you ever face any challenges?
I guess you always face different kinds of challenges. When I first started out, I felt like, well, not felt like, they actually handed me files and said, here, these are your cases for today. And so that was a challenge from the beginning, of not having someone who was actually like going with me and talking over everything with me. It was kind of like, you're thrown in, just go handle these. So I ended up learning a lot more from probation officers and caseworkers and mental health workers that were working in the field, about the process, but also about the people that I was working with at that point, and trying to do the best thing for the kids that were involved in the system. So I think for me, it became about learning about the population as much as about the job itself, and changed for me the role. And so I've tried to encourage folks after myself to take on those additional kind of roles of learning about the population that we work with, the kids, the families, and the law, all at the same time. When I first started out, I was one of probably a handful of women that were working in the family court. And there were a number of situations where folks would treat me in a way that I knew was not the way they would treat their male colleagues. One situation specifically that just stuns folks when I tell them this was, I was in an attorney conference in the courtroom, and there was a lawyer who in the course of that referred to me as baby cakes. And the judge was aghast and put his head down and said, incoming, thinking that I would, just kind of go off on the record. And he looked up, and I hadn't said anything. And he just looked at me, and I said, some comments are too stupid to even respond to. And he said to the other attorney, he turned to him and said, boom. And we kind of moved on from there.
Did you think the judge's response was appropriate?
I felt like he was much more supportive, and realizing how completely inappropriate it was. So I felt like he clearly would have said or done anything that I asked him to do in that situation. But I didn't feel I really needed to. And having his support was more important than dealing with the lack of support on the other side.
What did the rest of the bench look like, either in the family court or otherwise?
At that point in time, every judge that I dealt with in the family court process was male. And I would say 95% of the bar was male. Ironically, family court is an area where a number of female practitioners are involved. So even back then, it was a fairly small number. Today, that is different. There are significantly more female attorneys, both in the family court process, but in every other aspect of the work that we do.
You mentioned earlier that there were a few different examples, similar to the one that you just described in front of that specific judge. Were there any other examples of you feeling you were treated differently compared to maybe male attorneys in front of these other judges?
One other situation that comes to mind is an attorney who was talking with me about a case out in the hallway. And then he turned to me and said, "How does it feel to know that everyone is looking at you to see what you're wearing as opposed to listening to what you're saying?" And my response to him was, they do that, um, to their own um, demise, because if they're not thinking that I am um, being professional and um, going to be able to argue my case, then it's to their detriment.
Did you ever discuss those instances with your supervisors?
I did. I did. And again, I felt that my first supervisor in this office was incredibly supportive. And if I wanted him to take action on any situation, he would do that. There was one situation where I had left my calendar in the attorney conference room, and a couple of attorneys wrote what they thought was a funny comment in there. I didn't think it was very funny, and I thought it was something that they would not have written on a male colleagues, or they wouldn't have written on a more experienced female colleagues. And so I did take that to my boss, and he wrote a fairly scathing letter to those attorneys. And I did end up getting an apology on that, and um, ended up having, more of a opportunity to discuss with those attorneys how it felt. Um, I think made them understand that what they thought was humor was not necessarily received that way.
What was that comment?
It was a comment about what I would be doing outside of the office.
Okay. You mentioned there was a handful of females you worked with. Did your woman coworkers have similar experiences?
I believe that they did. There was a point in time where the women in the community started meeting for lunches, and there were women who talked about different experiences that they had with their male colleagues. So I know there were some folks that were experiencing some of the same things.
Do you recall any examples?
I do recall a couple different women speaking about how their male counterparts would speak over them, or correct the comments that they made in the courtroom, um, kind of undermining them with their clients and with the judges, and how they would handle that. And some being better able to do that than others. One of the other issues that was a significant one over the years was female attorneys crying. And some would actually do that and in the courtroom. And it became this thing where women would talk to each other about, do not ever, cross that line. Whatever you have to do to hold that in, even if you are, just feeling like you have to let it out. You cannot do that. It not only affects you and your work, but the opinion of women in the courtroom as a whole. And I feel like those conversations took place a lot more back when I first started practicing. It was something that was a significant issue, and something that people were afraid of that being the perception, the weepy female in the courtroom. And over time, I feel like I still have that conversation with younger attorneys about showing emotion, but not to the same extent as I did early on.
Early on, do you think your male colleagues were having those same conversations at all?
No, no. I feel like women respond in many ways differently. Um, but a part of it is not necessarily about how we are feeling, but the circumstances of the case bringing out those emotions. And I think the difference in how women are able to express those emotions is different. I think it's so much more common for women to cry with joy, cry with empathy. Um, Men don't necessarily do that as much, don't understand that response in women. Um, and so it's an impression of your skill, your ability, your strength, as opposed to your compassion and understanding and just willingness to share emotion. Um, and I think it's unfortunate that we can't do that without it impacting people's view of our professionalism.
Did you ever feel or notice whether clients had different views about women's professionalism when you were representing them as their attorney?
In the beginning, I felt that folks would question whether or not a woman was an attorney. I remember coming to court at one point to deliver paperwork on a case, and one of the staff people said, "Oh, you're the new secretary?" No, I'm the attorney on the case. So there was still that assumption that women were not actually the professionals, but the support staff. I think that has changed over the years. But that level of just assuming that a woman is not the professional in the beginning was difficult.
Did any of your clients ever assume that or decide to go a different way?
I don't believe that was ever an issue
Mhm.
with any of my clients. We may have disagreed, on things related to a case, but I never felt like anyone challenged me just because I was a woman.
You mentioned earlier that at the county's attorney's office, you moved up in position. What kind of new responsibilities did you take on?
So probably a year and a half after I started, there was an opportunity to move up to the next level. And that involved doing some civil litigation. And so I took on more of that role and stepped back a little bit from the family court work. I actually never completely stopped doing family court work. And my boss realized that that was a passion for me. And so basically said, you can continue to do some of this outside work, but you need to make a choice. Do you want to continue to kind of lead that family court unit? And I made the decision to stay with more of that work. But the work in our office, as I said, never is 100% in any one area. Because we represent the different departments, we do work on contracts, resolutions, any kind of legal issue that the departments would have. We would handle civil cases depending on our other workload, multiple different kinds of court appearances. And those have expanded over the years when we've taken on a couple of different types of cases, more administrative cases. And so our office is in quite a few more courts now than it was when I first started.
And what position do you have now at the county attorney's office?
I am the county attorney in the office at this point, and I've been serving in that role Since October of last year, I took it on temporarily. And then the person who was in that role decided to retire in November of 23. And they asked me to step in as the county attorney. So I've been acting in that role ever since.
Who did have the position before you?
Robert Banky. And I had never had a female county attorney here. I am the first in Broome County.
Do you have any plans looking forward in this position?
My plans are to leave the place better than I found it, however I can. Um, Mainly, I am interested in ensuring that the folks that are still here when I go are able to step in and cover the work that needs to be covered. And so I try to make sure that folks are cross-trained in all of our responsibilities. It's not necessarily easy to do that, and also have people be able to focus in different areas and get those strong skills in particular jobs, because there are so many things that need to be done. I still am doing some work in the family court unit, and I know eventually I will have to just completely pass all of that off. And I'm very happy to have found someone that I think will be able to step into that role and take it on and have some of the same passion that I had for that work.
Outside of your role as the county attorney for Broome County, do you do any work in the community?
I have served on a number of boards related to juvenile work. I have served as a board member for SUNY Cortland, the Board of Trustees, and I did that for a number of years. I've done some community work on boards. But I would say at this point, the majority of my time outside of the office is being a mother and a grandmother. I have 6 grandchildren and a 7th on the way. And one of the ways that I decompress from work is to follow them around and watch their activities and just fully take joy in what they do.
Cheryl, now that we've heard so much of what you've accomplished and learned, I'd like to ask some broader perspective questions for our audience. I started this interview by describing you as an attorney, a child advocate, and a mother. If you were to describe yourself in 3 to 4 phrases, if we went back, how would you describe yourself?
I think those descriptions are accurate. I take pride in the fact that I am an attorney and have done this work for a number of years. The child advocate, I love that you said that. I feel like I have tried to take a role that's perceived as being against the child and clarify for folks that we're all working to try to make children's lives better by preventing them from entering the adult criminal justice system. And so I love that description. Mother, that has been the greatest joy for me, is to watch my children and grandchildren. And so I believe that that is one of the best roles that I've been able to have. Wife and partner would be important as well. That relationship with my husband has allowed me to do those other things and to be successful at them and happy at them, and to feel that I have the help that I need to be able to do all of those other things. And hopefully I'm an advocate in general. I feel like over the years, situations where I should or would have liked to have addressed things differently I feel like I do now, and that I'm a person that would encourage other attorneys in general and other female attorneys to advocate more for themselves and to really speak on what's happening in their lives and in the process.
I also described you as a pioneer at the beginning. What aspects of your life have you felt like a pioneer, if any?
Um, I felt like a pioneer when I went to college. I was the first person in my family to go. Shortly after I started, my mom went to college. My brother went to college. And I'm so happy to say that in the generation of nieces and nephews, every single one went to college. And so it changed the trajectory of our family to have someone go and be the first one to blaze that trail. Um, I feel like somewhat of a pioneer in being a female attorney in this community, and also one that has had a longer career and has stuck to the work that she's been doing and have tried to encourage other women to not only step into those legal roles, but figure out what it is that they're passionate about. If it's not the law, move into what you really feel is right for you. Um, I think that's something I've learned over the years as well. If you are truly unhappy with what you're doing, find something else that is a better fit for you. Your life will feel a lot better if you are finding some joy, some happiness, some success in what you do.
Now, looking back on all you've experienced and achieved, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
The fact that I never doubted that I could go on and be a professional woman, that I could take on those roles, whether it was a doctor or a lawyer, that I had the ability to stick with something long enough to get to the career and then stick with the career, that I was able to see people as people, not just as a man, as a woman, um, see potential, um, and to work hard, even when it gets hard. That it's not always going to be easy to move through those milestones. There will be times when you question whether you have what it takes, whether it's what you want to do, both personally and professionally. You just need to keep powering through. Um, my the gift that I give to everyone who's having a baby is the book, The Little Engine That Could, and that's because from the time I was a baby through to today, my mother, anytime I question my ability, will say, I think I can. I think I can. And that is something that she put there for me and kept there for me, that if I try hard and believe that I can do something, I can. And um, I feel blessed to have had that support in truly believing that I could do what I wanted to do.
Cheryl, as we close our interview, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story with our audience and I today. It was truly an honor hearing your story, and I'm excited for the impact that your story will have on this project. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for including me. It's my pleasure.